Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're tackling a topic that's pretty common, but maybe not always openly discussed. Anal sex. You've probably heard about it. Maybe you're curious. Maybe you just want to understand it a bit better.
Right, and we've got this interesting resource called Tantra Anal Sex Techniques and Secrets.
Oh, okay.
And what's kind of neat is that it apparently came about because people actually asked for it, similar to guides on like Analingus and fellatio.
So there's a real demand for this info.
Seems like it, yeah. A desire for, let's say, clear information.
Okay, so our goal today isn't about being shocking or anything. We're just going to, dive into the key insights, the techniques from this guide for stimulation, penetration, for both men and women. Basically trying to get past the awkwardness and focus on, well, pleasure and safety.
Absolutely. Because there is potential for some really unique heightened experiences here.
Definitely worth exploring then.
Right.
So where does the guide start?
Well, first off, it dives right into the societal discomfort, the taboos surrounding it all.
Yeah, that's a big one.
And it makes a really good point that this discomfort is mostly cultural baggage,
Right.
Not because the act itself is inherently
It's learned discomfort, kind of.
Exactly. And understanding that can sort of help take the stigma away right from the beginning.
Which is important if you're even thinking about talking about it. That leads to communication, I guess.
Totally. The guide hammers this home. Open, honest conversation with your partner is like step 0. Absolutely essential before exploring anything.
Yeah, you can't just surprise someone with this.
Oh, definitely not. Sensitivity is crucial. You've
Yeah.
got to respect if your partner hesitates or if they're just not interested. Full stop.
Yeah, just because they're okay with one thing doesn't mean they're okay with everything. That's a boundary to respect.
Precisely. It's about mutual desire and comfort.
Okay, so let's talk about the why. Why do people enjoy it? What's the pleasure aspect?
Good question. The guide gets into the physiology. For men, the big thing is the prostate gland.
Right.
Anal contact can stimulate it directly, and that's a major pleasure center for many guys.
Okay, so direct stimulation. What about for women?
Well, for women, it's more about proximity. The rectum and the vagina share a wall, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the nerves involved in sexual sensation are actually quite close on the rectal side. So anal stimulation can indirectly, but sometimes really intensely light up those pathways.
Huh. So it's kind of an indirect route to stimulating similar nerve areas.
Pretty much. It can lead to, surprisingly intense pleasure for some women. It really shows how anatomy influences the potential here.
So the guide suggests it's maybe not for everyone, but highly rated by a lot of people.
Right.
Offers a change of pace.
Exactly. Worth exploring if you're both curious and comfortable.
Okay, let's get practical. Basics. Preparation, positions. What does the guide say?
It circles back to sensitivity first. Again, never attempt penetration without your partner expecting it and consenting.
Yeah, that seems obvious, but good to state clearly.
And it uses this pretty vivid analogy, comparing the potential discomfort if unprepared to, like, a really painful bowel movement.
Oof. Okay, point taken. Preparation is key.
Yeah.
Physically and mentally.
Right. So then it moves on to positions. This is practical stuff.
Okay.
Several options are laid out. First, lying on the back, legs spread or maybe knees pulled up.
Right.
Maybe a pillow under the butt to help with the angle. The guide says this can be easiest for the receiver, maybe feels a bit awkward for the giver sometimes, but accessible.
Gotcha. What else?
Then there's on elbows and knees, doggy style, basically.
Okay.
Often gives easier access, but the guide notes the receiver might tense up. Suggests maybe putting a pillow under the chest or belly could help them relax more. Adjusting leg position can tweak the angle too.
Makes sense. Any others?
Yeah, the third main one is lying on the side, legs kind of scissored.
Okay.
And you can play around with how the legs are positioned for comfort and access. It just shows their options, Find what works.
Right. Different bodies, different preferences.
Yeah.
Okay, what about cleanliness? That's often a big concern people have.
Understandably, yeah. The guide addresses it directly. Basic hygiene, like showering, maybe trying to have a bowel movement beforehand, simple stuff. But it also mentions using oil-based lubricants partly as a sort of barrier against potential smells or, transfer.
Interesting take. Like an insulator?
Kind of, yeah.
Yeah.
It specifically calls out Vaseline as being good for staying put and helping things feel clean afterwards.
Okay. Vaseline. What about more intensive methods?
It briefly touches on enemas. Says it's not super common, but for some, especially if aiming for deeper penetration, it can enhance comfort by ensuring cleanliness. But it frames it as a more extreme option.
Got it. And that brings us to lubrication itself. You mentioned oil-based.
Yes. Huge emphasis on lube. Absolutely crucial for any anal play because there's no natural lubrication there.
Right.
Oil-based lubes are often recommended because the friction is higher, but there's that big caveat. They can damage latex condoms, so you need to be aware of that.
Super important safety note. So if using condoms, maybe not oil-based.
Or use non-latex condoms like polyurethane ones, which are okay with oil. Water-based lubes are always safe with latex, but might need reapplication more often.
What about specific oil recommendations, besides Vaseline?
It mentions cocoa butter as another thick, lasting one. Thinner stuff like baby oil, less effective apparently. Doesn't provide enough cushion or staying power.
Good to know. So don't skimp on the lube and choose wisely based on condoms.
Definitely non-negotiable for comfort and safety.
All right, so we're prepared. We have lube.
Uh-huh.
How do we actually start?
Slowly.
Yeah.
Gently. The guide stresses a gradual approach. Start with, non-genital touching, build arousal and comfort.
Makes sense. General intimacy building.
Exactly. Then maybe move towards erogenous zones. And it specifically recommends oral sex, cunnilingus, or fellatio before any direct anal exploration.
Ah, okay. As a way to increase arousal and relaxation.
Precisely. Get things warmed up, create a relaxed, sensual atmosphere before focusing on a more sensitive area. It connects different types of intimacy.
Okay, so after oral, what's the next step the guide suggests? Analingus.
Yeah, analingus oral stimulation of the anus. It's described as a pretty simple, safe starting point.
Okay.
One practical tip it gives is that you often need to use hands, yours or your partner's, to gently spread the buttocks for, better access.
Right, that makes sense. What about technique?
It describes a whole range, like light flicking with the tongue, gentle licking around the opening, maybe deeper probing with a more rigid tongue, or even applying pressure with a sort of widened tongue.
So lots of variety depending on preference.
Totally. And it highlights the perineum, that area between the anus and genitals. Apparently, licking or gently sucking there can be really stimulating, especially for men, because it indirectly stimulates the testicles and prostate.
Interesting. So indirect stimulation can be powerful too.
Absolutely. The advice is basically try different things, mix techniques, and pay really close attention to your partner's reactions. Verbal cues, nonverbal cues. Find out what feels good to them.
Communication again, always key.
Always. The guide does note, though, that analingus alone probably won't lead to orgasm for most people.
Okay.
So it suggests incorporating genital stimulation at the same time. It even points back to its other guides for hand stimulation techniques during oral sex. It's about the whole picture.
Gotcha. So analingus is a good starting point, maybe combined with other things. What comes after that? Finger stimulation.
Exactly. Moving on to finger stimulation. And again, the mantra is gradual progression. Work up to actual penetration slowly.
Okay.
And this is where the advice gets a bit more specific, depending on whether your partner is male or female.
Right. But are there general tips first?
Yeah, definitely. First, acknowledge that fingers aren't perfectly smooth, right? They have texture.
Sure.
So basic hand care lotion, trimmed nails is recommended. But here's a big one. Using rubber or latex gloves.
Gloves. Why is that so beneficial?
The guide says it can make a huge difference, especially for beginners. Apparently, discomfort people might blame on the penetration itself can sometimes just vanish when using a smooth glove. It reduces friction significantly.
Wow, okay. That's a really practical tip. Worth trying.
Definitely. And it notes that with gloves, water-based lubricants often work just fine since the main benefit is the smoothness, not necessarily fluid barrier in this specific context, though barrier protection is always good.
Got it. So gloves and lube. How to actually begin the insertion.
Start gently, touching around the anus, circling the opening. The guide actually says to look and locate the opening visually first. Don't just rely on touch or your partner guiding you, as they might be slightly off.
Okay, good point. Visual confirmation.
Then really gradual penetration, millimeter by millimeter, it says. Use gentle, rhythmic pushing motions until you feel you're past that initial muscle, the sphincter.
Right, the sphincter. That's the tight ring of muscle.
Exactly. And the advice for the receiver is to try and relax that muscle. The guide suggests imagining the feeling of slightly pushing, like when you're starting a bowel movement. That can help relax the sphincter.
Okay, that's a helpful visualization. Relaxation is key for the receiver.
Absolutely essential. Mental relaxation, physical relaxation.
Okay, so that's the general approach. Now, what about specifically for a male partner?
For men, the focus is heavily on the prostate. That's the primary pleasure spot here.
Where is it located again?
If he's lying on his back, it's on the upside of the rectum towards the belly button, a short way inside. You can often feel it as a sort of walnut-sized bump.
Okay.
The guide suggests maybe starting by just gently pressing or massaging the perineum externally first. Then, if you do insert a finger, work towards the prostate gradually.
Gradually. Why the caution?
Because sudden, strong pressure on the prostate can apparently be either intensely pleasurable, leading to orgasm, or quite uncomfortable, even painful, so ease into it.
Got it. Find the right pressure.
Right. And it mentions that prostate stimulation can lead to a different type of orgasm, maybe more intense, maybe with a more watery ejaculate.
Interesting.
And it suggests combining prostate feeder stimulation with fellatio. Seems like a potentially powerful combo.
Definitely sounds intense. Okay, what about finger stimulation for a female partner?
Here, the guide links it strongly back to oral sex, specifically cunnilingus.
How so?
It suggests starting by incorporating just incidental anal touching while you're already performing cunnilingus and maybe using a finger vaginally, just getting her used to the sensation near there.
Ah, okay. Very gentle introduction.
Yeah. Then, maybe gradually introduce just a pinky finger with plenty of lube into the anus.
Pinky first. Smallest finger. Makes sense.
And for actual, more intentional penetration, it advises having another finger in the vagina at the same time, providing the primary stimulation, maybe focusing on the G-spot.
So the anal finger is more secondary stimulation initially.
Seems to be the suggestion. Keep the main focus where she's already experiencing pleasure. And again, slow progression for the anal finger, lots of lube, maybe a glove.
And once the finger's inside.
The focus then is on gently pressing the rectal wall that's closest to the vagina. Remember that shared wall?
Right. Stimulating through the wall.
Exactly. And it mentions an advanced technique, using fingers in both the vagina and rectum simultaneously to press along that shared wall from both sides.
Wow, okay. That sounds intricate.
It does, and it comes with a very important warning. Never swap fingers between the anus and vagina without thorough washing or changing gloves.
Why is that?
Risk of transferring bacteria, potentially including intestinal parasites, from the rectum to the vagina. It notes it's uncommon, but a serious potential risk. Hygiene is critical.
Absolutely. Critical safety point there. Okay, so that covers fingers. What about actual intercourse, penis or toy penetration?
Right. The guide basically says everything we just discussed about preparation, communication, gradualness, lubrication, finger stimulation, it all still applies.
So don't skip those steps.
Definitely not. In fact, it strongly recommends starting with fingers, even if penile penetration is the goal. Helps the receiver relax, gets them used to the feeling.
Okay, good advice. Ease into it.
And it makes the point that fingers, even with gloves, can feel rougher than the smooth head of a penis. So if multiple fingers felt uncomfortable, one finger might be fine, and a penis might feel even better. It's about reassuring your partner.
That's a good point about texture difference.
Yeah. And again, take your time. Maybe engage in other intimacy first. Build up to it.
Right. So for the actual penetration, any specific tips there?
Manual stimulation during the process is still encouraged. And then, hitting the hole, the guide says be careful. It can be harder to target than the vagina.
Okay.
So visual alignment is good. Maybe start by dieting with a finger right next to the penis and finding the right angle. This is apparently key. Most angles are wrong, it says. So gentle exploration to find the path of least resistance.
Angle is crucial. Got it.
And then back to that millimeter at a time approach. Gentle pumping motions. Don't just try to shove it in.
Right. Slow and steady.
And again, the receiver needs to be relaxed. Mind relaxed, sphincter relaxed, that feeling of relaxing for a bowel movement again. And lube. Lots of lube, making sure the whole shaft is coated too, not just the tip.
Lube, lube, lube. Got it.
The guide explains that getting past the sphincter, that initial entry, is usually the biggest hurdle. Once the head of the penis is in, sliding the rest of the way should be easier, assuming average anatomy.
Okay, so the initial part is the trickiest.
Usually. And once inside, it suggests maybe slightly shifting the angle. So the head of the penis presses against that internal wall closest to the prostate in men, or the vagina in women, for extra stimulation.
Targeted pressure inside.
Yeah. And it also mentions the tightness itself can be very stimulating for the penetrating partner.
Makes sense. Now, the guide mentions something about tearing. That sounds concerning.
It does. It mentions a medical observation that there can be very slight tearing of the sphincter muscle, comparing it to like tiny lesions you might get from brushing your teeth too hard.
Yeah.
Usually heals quickly.
Okay, minor, like mouth stuff.
However, and this is a massive however, It immediately follows up by stating that the slight tearing is a major factor in the transmission of HIV and other STIs.
Ah, right. That makes it much more serious.
Extremely, because it creates an entry point for viruses. So the guide strongly advises using condoms if there is any uncertainty about STI status. That risk factor makes condom use incredibly important for anal sex.
That is a crucial safety message. Can't emphasize that enough. Risk reduction is paramount.
Absolutely vital. Non-negotiable if there's any doubt.
Okay. Assuming things are going well, people are comfortable. Does it mention more advanced positions?
Yeah. Once comfortable, it mentions things like the receiver being on top, gives them control, but it warns it can be tricky for beginners because it's easy to instinctively tighten the buttocks.
Right, which would make it harder.
Exactly. Standing positions are also mentioned, but same potential issue with muscle tension, so maybe not for the first few times.
Okay. And finally, anything about orgasms?
It highlights the potential for simultaneous orgasms,
Yeah.
especially if the penetrating partner is also providing manual, clitoral, or penile stimulation at the same time. Again, it refers back to techniques maybe covered in its other guides on oral sex. It's all interconnected.
It really does all seem connected.
Wow, okay. That's a lot of detailed information from that guide.
It is. It provides a pretty comprehensive foundation for understanding and exploring anal sex safely and hopefully pleasurably.
So let's quickly recap the main takeaways. What should people really remember?
Okay, number one, communication. Talk openly, honestly, respectfully with your partner.
Crucial.
Number two, go slow. Gradual exploration is key. Don't rush.
Mm-hmm.
3, lubrication. Use plenty. Choose wisely, especially regarding condoms.
Yeah, absolutely.
4, pay attention to anatomy and individual preferences. What feels good is different for everyone. Listen to feedback.
And 5, remember the potential for unique pleasure for both partners if it's something you both want to explore.
Great summary. It really covers the core principles.
Yeah, it gives you the tools to think about it at least.
Definitely. So as we wrap up this deep dive, maybe a final thought for our listeners to mull over.
Sure, how about this? Thinking about your own experiences or desires around intimacy, what aspect feels maybe the most exciting or perhaps the most challenging to actually discuss with a partner?
Ooh, good question.
And then how might bringing that open communication we've talked so much about today actually enhance that specific aspect of your connection?
That's powerful. It brings it back to communication being the foundation for exploring anything new or maybe sensitive in intimacy. A great place to leave off.
Food for thought.